There are crueler inheritances than debt. A ruined name is one of them. It follows a daughter into every room, waits at every cold hearth, and answers the door before she can. So, when the man whose family had broken hers came riding through the first hard frost to the crumbling house where she lived alone, the whole valley expected him to finish what his father had begun and turn her out into the snow. Instead, he stood in her ruined hall and made her an offer no soul in that valley could have imagined. But first, the frost, and the girl who would not leave it. The frost came to Greywater a full month before it had any right to. By the middle of October, the moor had turned to iron. The reeds along the old drainage cut stood white and brittle, and the beech leaves lay stiff in the ditches under a rime that did not soften at noon. Aveline Merrick woke each morning to find the inside of her window glazed with ice, pale ferns spreading across the one pane she still kept glass in. She was 24 years of age. She had lived at Greywater the whole of that life, and she had watched the house die around her by inches. There had been 40 rooms once. Now she kept 2. The east parlor, where a small fire could be nursed through the night if she was sparing with the coal, and the scullery behind it, where she cooked what little there was. The rest she had shut away as the money failed, drawing dust sheets over the chairs her father had loved, until the far corridors felt less like a home than a tomb she happened to sleep inside. Once Greywater had been the second finest house in the valley, and the finest had belonged to the Dukes of Ravenmore, whose lands began across the low marsh. The 2 houses had been neighbors. For a while, her father had told her. They had even been friends. Then, in the year she was born, the 2 families joined their fortunes in a single great scheme, a plan to drain the marsh between their lands and turn 1,000 acres of drowned bog into farmland. The scheme failed. The money, an enormous sum, simply vanished. And when the 2 houses came looking for a man to blame, each of them settled upon the other. The old Duke swore that Baron Merrick had gambled the capital away. Her father swore the Duke had withdrawn his share in secret and called in every loan to save himself. The friendship curdled into a hatred so complete the 2 men never spoke again, and the Merrick name became a byword for ruin from Alderton to the sea. Her father had not survived it, not truly. He lived another 10 years, but the man who taught her to read a ledger at 7 and to sit a horse at 8 had gone into the ground long before his body followed. He died 10 winters past, of a fever he was too tired to fight, and Aveline buried him at Alderton with 3 mourners and walked home to a house of 40 rooms with no one in it but herself. She did not weep for him any longer. She had learned that grief, like coal, had to be rationed. What she had in its place was work. Her father, having no son, had raised her, as he might a son, and she had a head 4 figures she privately considered the only thing of true value she still owned. She kept bees along the crumbling garden wall and sold honey in Alderton on market days, and managed the 1-tenant farm, not yet sold from under her old Barrows, who paid in eggs and mutton as often as coin. And quietly, in the back rooms of shops where no one who mattered would think to look, she kept the account books of half the tradesmen in the town. They paid her in flour and cloth and tallow, and every one of them would have denied to your face that a Merrick woman kept their sums. It was enough to live on, barely. It was not enough to leave on, which came to the same thing, for leaving cost money she did not have, and staying cost only her pride, and her pride was the one coin she had never learned how to spend. She was mending the draper's ledger by the parlor fire the morning the frost broke its own record, when the knock came at the front door. It was not a knock she knew. The tradesman came to the scullery. Barrow came to the yard. This was the flat official rap of a man who believed the front door belonged to him, and Aveline set down her pen with the particular stillness of a woman who has learned that bad news keeps a schedule of its own. Mr. Tolliver stood upon the step, agent for the men in the city who held the mortgage, a soft, apologetic creature with cold hands and a folder clutched to his chest like a shield. He had come about the arrears. Aveline did not ask him inside. She stood in the doorway and let him say his piece in the wind, which was a small cruelty and the only kind she could still afford. There was a paper, he explained, a generous paper. If she would sign away her claim to Greywater and quit it by the new year, the gentleman would forgive the arrears entirely and settle £50 on her, a great deal more, he felt certain, than she could otherwise hope to realize. Aveline looked at the figure he had written and felt the old machinery of her mind turn over, cold and exact. "Your gentlemen have made an error," she said. Tolliver blinked. "I beg your pardon, 2 of them in point of fact." She tapped the page. "You have valued the timber on the north rise at the price of standing softwood. It is oak, Mr. Tolliver. 40 years grown. It is worth 6 times what you have set against it. And you have forgotten the water rights on the old cut entirely, which any man who meant to drain that marsh a second time would pay handsomely to hold. Your £50 is not generosity. It is a theft dressed up for church." The agent's soft face went blotched and pink. He gathered his folder, muttered that the offer would stand until the new year, and retreated to his gig. Aveline shut the door upon him with a quiet click that gave her more satisfaction than she would have confessed to any priest. She did not know then that she had just refused the last easy road out of Greywater she would ever be offered. She had only turned back to the fire when she heard the second sound of that morning, not the light wheels of a gig, hooves single and heavy, a big horse ridden hard across frozen ground. She went to the iced window and scraped a clear place in it with her thumbnail. A single rider, black against the white of the moor, was turning in at her broken gate. And as he came on, the thin sun caught the silver at the brow of his bridle and picked out, worked deep into the leather of the saddle-cloth, the crest she had been taught to hate before she was ever taught to pray. A raven, wings spread wide, above a drowned field. Ravenmore had come to Greywater. Aveline stood very still at the window, her thumbnail still pressed to the cold glass, and watched her enemy dismount in her own front yard. She had never seen him close. She had seen the crest her whole life, on the gateposts of the great park to the north, on the black carriages that swept past Greywater without slowing, and she had learned the shape of it the way other children learned the shape of a wolf. But the man himself she knew only as the valley knew him, which was to say by rumor, and the rumor was not kind. The new Duke of Ravenmore had come home from the war the year before, and the war had not seen fit to give him back whole. He had gone out a younger son, 3rd in the line, and expected to die a soldier, and he had done everything in Spain but die. A fever took his eldest brother while he was away, a bad fall on the hunting field took the second, and then the old Duke followed both his heirs into the ground inside a single year. So the 3rd son had come limping home to find himself a duke, saddled with a title he had never wanted and an estate that had run half to ruin in his long absence. They called him the Raven now, and not for the crest alone. They said he received no callers. They said he had turned the Lord Lieutenant of the county away at his own gates. They said he walked the bounds of Ravenmore alone before dawn, with a dog and a gun, and no word for any soul, and that the war had burned something out of him, that no fire since had put back. And here he was, on the frozen gravel of Greywater, tying a black horse to the one gate-post that still stood upright. He was tall, taller than she had expected, and he moved with a careful economy that she knew at once, because she had watched it in her own father at the end. It was the way a man moves when some part of him is always, quietly, at war with itself. He wore no finery, only a plain dark greatcoat, mud to the knee, and beneath its collar she could see, even from the window, the pale track of a scar that climbed from below his cravat up the side of his throat to the corner of his jaw. She let the curtain fall. For one shameful moment, she thought of the shut rooms at her back, of how simple it would be to make no sound, to let the dead house swallow her, to let him hammer at the door of a Merrick who might, for anything he knew, be a year in the ground herself. And then she was angry with herself for having thought it. This was her house. It was a ruin, and it was mortgaged past all sense, and it was cold within as the inside of a bell, but it was hers. Her father had died in the room above, believing to his last breath that the Ravenmoors had murdered him as surely as if they had used a knife, and she would sooner freeze than hide from one of them in her own hall like a mouse beneath a floorboard. The knock came again. Not the flat official rap of the agent. Slower, heavier, a gloved fist on old oak. Aveline crossed the cold flags of the hall, past the pale rectangles where the paintings had hung before they were sold, past the staircase that climbed into the dark and the dust. She drew back the single bolt that still worked. She set her hand to the iron latch, found it steady, and was fiercely glad of it, for she had promised herself long ago that whatever else the world took from her, it would never again see her hands shake. She opened her door to the man whose family had destroyed her own. Close to, he was both worse and better than the rumor of him. The scar was uglier by far, but the eyes above it were not the flat, cruel black of the crest at all. They were a strange pale gray, the gray of frost on the reeds, and they moved over her once, taking in the thrice-mended gown and the ink on her fingers, and the thin white line of her mouth, and something in them shifted, though she could not have told a soul to what. She waited for it. The sneer, the order, to be gone, the cruelty she had held herself braced against, since she was old enough to understand the weight of her own name. The Duke of Ravenmoor took off his hat. His ruined right hand did not quite close as it should around the brim, and some cold and distant part of her mind noted the fact out of long habit and filed it away. "Miss Merrick," he said. His voice was low and rough and worn thin like the rest of him, and it carried, against every last thing she had prepared herself to hear in it, no contempt at all. "I have not come for the house." She stared at him. In 24 years, no Ravenmoor had ever given a Merrick anything but the flat back of his hand. And now here stood the very worst of them, hatless in her doorway, in a killing cold, and the first words out of his mouth were the one sentence in all the world against which she had never once thought to raise a defense. For a moment Aveline did not move aside. The wind came off the moor and pushed between them, and she stood square in her own doorway with the ruin at her back and the enemy of her blood on her step, and she weighed his 4 words against 24 years, and found she did not believe them. "You will forgive me, Your Grace," she said, "if I do not take a Ravenmoor at his word." Something crossed his scarred face that might, in a warmer man, have been the beginning of a smile. "No," he said, "I don't suppose you would." He did not push past her. He did not order her aside. He stood in the cold with his hat in his ruined hand, and waited, and it came to her slowly that he was asking, that a Duke of Ravenmore was standing upon Merrick ground waiting to be granted leave to enter, and that he would go on waiting until she gave it or sent him away. It was the waiting that undid her. She had braced herself for force. She had no defense prepared against patience. She stepped back, and she let him in. He had to stoop beneath the lintel. Inside the hall swallowed him. All that height and dark wool gone small under the great cold vault of a house built for a family that no longer existed. She watched him take it in the bare walls. The staircase going up into nothing. She waited for the flicker of contempt, or worse of pity, and braced against both. Neither came. He simply looked the way a man looks at weather, and then he looked back at her and said, "It is colder in here than it is out of doors. The fires are where the family lives," she said. "There is no family. You live here. I am what is left." She led him to the parlor because there was nowhere else in 40 rooms fit to stand in, and she was aware, with a bitterness that sat in her throat like a stone, of every mended thing in it. The chair with the worn arm, the single candle she had not lit because candles cost money, the fire she had let sink to a red sullen handful of coals because it was not yet noon and the scuttle had to last until dark. He saw. She knew he saw it, because his eyes went to the near-empty scuttle and stayed there a moment too long. Then something happened that she had not braced for, because she had not imagined it, because in all her long rehearsal of this morning there had been no version of it in which the Duke of Ravenmore crossed her parlor, lowered himself with the stiff care of a wounded man onto one knee at her hearth. "Your Grace." She heard her own voice come out sharp. "That coal must last me until the new year. Then it will last you until the new year." He set the coals with his left hand, quick and sure, and fed them with his right. And she saw why the right was slower, saw the 2 fingers that would not fully close, the old ruin of the hand doing patient work anyway. He did not fumble it. He had plainly learned to be a wounded man, the way she had learned to be a poor one, which was to say thoroughly and without complaint, and with a private fury he let no one see. The fire caught. It climbed. Within a minute, the sullen red handful had become a living thing throwing real heat into the room, more heat than Aveline had allowed herself in a single sitting in 3 years. And she stood in the middle of it with her arms crossed hard over her chest and hated how badly her body wanted to lean toward it. It was not the warmth that undid her, though the warmth was very nearly unbearable. It was the plainness of the thing. She had grown used, over the years, to 2 kinds of looking. There was the look that wanted something from her, and there was the look that pitied her, and she had built a wall against each of them. Stone by stone, she had no wall ready for this. He had not fretted over her, nor clucked, nor offered her his handkerchief, and his sympathy, and his fine sense of his own goodness. He had seen that a person was cold, and decided that she would not be, and mended it with his ruined hands as though it were a fallen gate. No one had refused to let her be cold since her father died. She had forgotten that anyone could. "You have spent a week of my coal," she said. "I will send a cart." He got to his feet, not easily. Coal and wood, and whatever else this house needs to stop trying to kill the one person still living in it. You may consider it rent. Rent for what? You said you have not come for the house. I have not. He turned from the fire to face her, and the new light moved over the scar and the tired gray eyes, and for the first time she saw past the rumor of the raven, to the plain, exhausted man underneath it. I have come about the year the money vanished, the year the marsh took both our families down with it. The warmth went out of Abeline's body as though a door had opened. My father did not gamble it, she said. Whatever your father told the world, I know he did not. She had spent so long expecting the accusation that the absence of it left her with nowhere to put her feet. She stared at him. You cannot know that. I know it, said the Duke, because my father spent the last 2 years of his life trying to prove it, and could not. And it is my belief that the failure is what killed him. He said it without drama, the way he had built the fire, plainly as a thing that simply needed doing. He left papers, locked papers that no one was meant to read. I have read them, and they have convinced me of one thing above all others, Miss Merrick, which is that everything the world believes about how your father was ruined and how mine died is a lie that someone built on purpose and built well. He reached into his coat and set a single sheet on the table between them, soft and furred at the folds from much handling, covered in a cramped and failing hand. My father's, he said, near the end when he could no longer sleep. He had gone back through the accounts of the scheme, line by line, the way a man worries at a sore tooth. And he came to believe the numbers had been altered. Not lost, not gambled away. Altered by a hand that had reached into both houses at once, and done it cleverly enough that each side saw only the other's guilt. Then prove it, Evelyn said. You have his papers. You have the Ravenmore books. I have half a crime, Miss Merrick. The gray eyes did not leave her. Whoever did this balanced his lie across 2 sets of ledgers that have never once, in 20 years, sat upon the same table. What is missing from mine was made to look found in your father's, and the reverse. My father could see the shape of the thing and never close his hand around it, because he was only ever permitted to see his own half. There is one person left in England who carries the other half in her head. He paused. I am looking at her. The fire cracked and settled. Somewhere far off in the dead house, a shutter knocked in the wind. Why come to me? She said at last. Her voice did not sound like her own. You are a duke. You have solicitors. You have men whose entire profession is the turning over of other men's papers. I have men who can read a ledger, he agreed. I have not one who can read this one. And there is exactly one person alive who knew Baron Merrick's affairs from the inside, who was raised at his knee to a head, for figures that the whole county still whispers about, and who has more reason than any soul on earth to want the truth of it dragged into the light. He held her eyes. She is standing in front of me, spending her last coal to keep a dead house warm, and she has just told a mortgage agent to his face what his own timber is worth. Aveline said nothing. Her heart was doing something painful and unfamiliar against her ribs. So, no, the Duke said. I have not come for the house. I have come to make you an offer, Miss Merrick. And I would ask you to hear the whole of it before you throw me back into the snow. The offer, when he laid it out, was nothing she could have braced for, because nothing that morning had gone the way she had braced for it, and she was beginning to find the sensation exhausting. He did not offer her charity. He was careful about that, and she noticed the care, and hated that it worked. He offered her employment. There were, he said, 40 years of Ravenmore accounts shut in a muniment room that no one had opened since his father died, and a steward's ledgers he suspected were as honest as a card-sharp's cuff, and an estate bleeding money in a dozen ways he had neither the head nor the patience to trace. He required someone to set it in order. He would pay her a wage for that work, a real wage. The same he would pay a man of business up from the city, and he named a figure that made her go still, for it was more in a single quarter than Greywater had seen in a year. And while she was about it, he said, while she had his books open before her and her father's laid beside them, she would help him do the thing his father had died trying to do, She would find the hand that had reached into both houses. She would reconcile the two halves of the crime.
"You would bring the Merrick papers to Ravenmore," Aveline said. "I would bring you to Ravenmore."
"The papers may travel in your keeping, and leave in it, and no Ravenmore hand will touch them save by your leave. I am not fool enough to ask a Merrick to surrender her father's ledgers to the house she believes murdered him." Believed. The word was out before she had chosen it. He inclined his head a fraction, and did not press it, and that too was a kind of care. She turned from him and looked into the fire he had built her, and made herself think, for thinking was the one thing she had never let grief or fear take from her. It was too neat. A Ravenmore did not ride through a killing frost to hand a Merrick a wage and an apology. There was a hook in it somewhere buried in the bait, and she had lived too long on scraps to swallow anything whole. "Tell me why," she said. "And do not tell me it is for love of the truth, your grace, for men do not spend a duke's income and a duke's name on love of the truth. What is in it for Ravenmore? Say it plainly, or I will send you back to your horse and take my chances with the snow." For a long moment he did not answer. "My father," he said at last, "went into his grave, believing he had ruined a good man for a crime neither of them committed. He could not prove it, and so he could not undo it, and so he carried it, and I watched it eat him from the inside like rot in a beam. I came back from the war with a great deal already set against my name. Miss Merrick, I find I have no room left on the account for a debt I did not even earn. I want it settled. I want to know where that money went." He held her eyes. "And I will give you the part you are waiting for, the part you believe I am too proud to say. I do not know that the truth clears my father. It may condemn him. The hand in those books may prove a Ravenmore hand after all, and if it does, I will publish it, and set my own name in the mud beside your father's to drag his out of it. I am not offering you a friend. I am offering you a man who wants the truth badly enough to be destroyed by it. You may judge for yourself whether that is worth less to you than a friend, or a great deal more." The fire spat. Aveline became aware that her hands had unclenched. She thought of £50 and a paper dressed up for church. She thought of the churchyard at Alderton, and the 3 mourners in the rain. She thought of her father's ledgers wrapped in oilcloth in the one trunk she had never let the auctioneers pry open, and of how many nights she had sat over them certain the truth was in there somewhere, and that she would die in this cold house without ever being handed the second half of it. "I have conditions," she said. Something eased at the corner of his hard mouth. "Name them. I do not sign away Greywater, not for £50, not for 5,000, not to your gentleman in the city and not to you. It is a ruin, and it is mine, and it stays mine." "Agreed." "My father's papers are mine also. You do not open them without me in the room. When the work is done, they come home with me. And if the hand in those books proves to be my father's after all," her voice did not shake, and she was proud of that. "If I have kept those ledgers 10 years like a fool, praying over the bones of a guilty man, then I am the one who finds it, not you, not a solicitor, me. I will not be the last soul in England to learn what my own father truly was." The Duke of Ravenmore looked at her a long moment, and whatever it was he saw, it moved him to do the one thing the whole valley swore he never did. He bowed. Not the shallow tip of the chin a man gives a servant. A bow, from a duke, to a ruined woman in a thrice-mended gown, in a house with no fires but the one he had lit himself. "Agreed, Miss Merrick," he said. "The whole of it." And so the bargain was struck, in a cold parlor, over a fire built by the wrong man's hands. Aveline did not know, because she could not yet know, that far beyond the white moor a comfortable man was sitting in a warm room, and that within the week word would reach him that the Merrick girl and the Raven of Ravenmoor meant to lay their two halves of the ledger on a single table at last. She did not know that he had spent 20 years, and one patient and beautiful lie, making certain that no one ever did. She came to Ravenmoor for the first time on the second morning of November, in a borrowed cart, with her father's ledgers swaddled in oilcloth on the seat beside her like an invalid she was afraid to jostle. Ravenmoor was everything Greywater was not, and somehow the very same. Where her house was small and cold and empty, this one was vast and cold and empty, a great grey pile of a place, with too many chimneys, and smoke rising from only 3 of them. The park had gone to bracken, and the ornamental water had silted at one end into a marsh slowly, patiently, trying to become the very bog the 2 families had once beggared themselves to drain. Someone had cared for all of it once. No one had, for years. The whole estate held its breath, still waiting for a master who had come home in body and no other way at all. The door was opened by a butler who looked older than the house, a spare and upright man named Fenn, with a face like a shut drawer. He took in Aveline and the oilcloth bundle and the particular Merrick set of her jaw, and he made his feelings perfectly plain by arranging his face to hold no feeling whatsoever. "His Grace is in the library," Fenn said, in the tone of a man announcing a bereavement. "You are expected. A dog met her in the great hall." A rough grey lurcher, old and grave, and nearly as tall as a foal, rose stiffly from the cold hearth, considered her a long moment out of clouded eyes, then crossed the flags and leaned the whole considerable weight of himself against her legs, as though the 2 of them had settled something years ago and were merely confirming it. "Bracken," said Fenn, faintly scandalized. "He does not do that." "He knows a hard winter when he smells one on a person," said Aveline, and scratched the great bony head, and did not miss the way the butler's shut-drawer face came open a crack before it firmly closed itself again. The library was the one room in the house that was truly warm, and she understood at once that it was warm because it was the only room the Duke was ever in. Books to the ceiling, most of them unread, and some of them, she suspected, unreadable, a vast table under the windows, and on it, waiting for her, the Ravenmoor accounts of the drainage scheme, carried up at last from the muniment room in 11 calf-bound volumes that smelled of mice and old damp. "Fenn disapproves of me," she said, unwrapping her father's ledgers with the care of a surgeon. "Fenn has disapproved of everything since the year 8, said the Duke from the far end of the table. "He disapproved of my father. He will disapprove of us, both a great deal less if we give him something to be right about. Sit where the light is good." She sat where the light was good. She had thought, riding over, that the Duke would hover and interrupt and require everything explained twice, the way clever men so often did when a woman held the pen. She was wrong, at least on that count. He did not hover. He worked at his own end of the table on his own correspondence, in the laborious left-handed script the ruined right hand had cost him, and he let her be, and only the scratch of 2 pens and the settling of the fire and the great sighing weight of bracken across her feet marked the passing of the first long morning. It was not the silence of Greywater. At Greywater, the silence had teeth. This one merely had the 2 of them in it, each about a task, and Aveline found, to her private alarm, that she did not hate it. By the 3rd day, she had the shape of the Ravenmoor books in her head. By the 5th, she had begun to lay them, column against column, beside the shape of her father's. And on the 5th, a little after noon, with sleet ticking at the black windows, she went very still. "Your Grace," he looked up. Something in her voice had brought his head round at once. In the spring the works began, she said slowly. The joint fund paid out a great sum, £3,000. It is here, in your father's book, plain as a gravestone. Paid over to Baron Merrick for pipe and timber and the wages of the cutting gangs on the Merrick side. She set a finger on the Ravenmore page and reached across to her father's ledger, its pages soft with 10 years of her reading. And here is my father's book. The same spring, the same works, and there is no such sum in it. Not received, not spent, not anywhere. £3,000 left Ravenmore addressed to my father, your grace, and it never once touched Merrick ground. The room was very quiet. The sleet ticked. He squandered it, the Duke said. But he said it the way a man tests a floorboard he already knows is rotten. That is the story. He took it and gambled it away. Then it would be here. Haviland's voice had gone flat and precise, the voice she kept for numbers, the only voice that had never once betrayed her. A gambler leaves a hole has edges. There would be the money coming in, and then nothing going out to match the works, and I would have found that hole 10 years ago and wept over it and made my peace. There is no hole. The money never arrived to be lost. Your father's book says it was sent. My father's book does not know it ever existed. She looked up and found the gray eyes already on her. Both books cannot be honest. No thief on your side could have reached into my father's ledger to keep it quiet, and no thief on my side could have written the lie into yours. Only one kind of man could have done both. A man who kept both sets of books, said the Duke, very low. A man both our fathers trusted with the whole of it. She sat back. Her heart was going hard, and it was not fear, or not only fear. It was the terrible, clean joy of a lock turning over. This entry should not exist. He was careful everywhere else. I can feel the care. All through these pages, a hand that never once slipped. But he could not make £3,000 vanish out of the world. He could only send it out of one book and keep it out of the other, and pray the two books never met. She laid her palm flat across both open pages. The Ravenmore and the Merrick together, on one table for the first time in 20 years. They have met, but Aveline was no longer in the room. She was 7 years old at an audit dinner, and a smiling man was pressing a sugared almond into her hand and telling her father over her head that the little miss had the makings of a first-rate clerk. "Your Grace," she said, and heard her voice come from very far away. "The man who kept those books, is he dead?" The Duke did not answer. For a moment, and the not answering was answer enough to turn her cold. "No," he said. "He is not dead at all. He has done rather well for himself. The story reached Alderton before the first snow did. It could not have been otherwise. A ruined Merrick spinster, carried daily to Ravenmore in a cart, and shut up for hours in the library of the Raven. A man who had turned the Lord Lieutenant from his own gates. There was no arrangement of those facts a market town could leave alone. By the middle of November, the honey buyers had stopped meeting her eye. By the end of it, the draper whose ledger she had balanced for 2 winters sent a boy to say his accounts were, henceforth, his own affair. She heard the word they had chosen for her from a farmer's wife at the Alderton Cross, who said it not quite quietly enough, and then looked frightened at her own daring mistress. Not the honest kind. Aveline found, somewhat to her surprise, that she did not care in the way she was supposed to. A reputation, she had decided long ago, was a coin like any other, and its only use lay in the spending of it. Matt. She had nothing she wished to buy in Alderton. She was not in the market for a husband, nor a place at the assembly dances, nor the good opinion of women who had watched her starve in a cold house for 10 years and sent not so much as a loaf. Let them call her what they pleased. The numbers in the Ravenmoor ledgers did not care whether she was respectable. The truth she was digging toward did not blush. She said as much to the Duke, one afternoon when a note of anonymous filth arrived, folded into the estate post, and he made to sweep it into the fire before she could see it. "Leave it," she said. "I have been called worse by better." He looked at her a long moment across the table, and something moved behind the gray eyes that she was beginning, against all her intentions, to be able to read. "You should not have to be brave about this. Bravery is only fear that has run out of alternatives, Your Grace. I ran out of alternatives some years ago. You need not pity the habit." He did not pity it. He went back to his letters. But she noticed that the next note of filth did not reach her at all, and that a footman had quietly been set to reading the estate post before it came upstairs, and she said nothing, because there are some kindnesses a proud woman can only accept by pretending not to have seen them. The harder thing came in December. He did not come to Greywater this time. Mr. Tolliver came to Ravenmoor, which told her at once that something had shifted, for a soft man does not walk into the Raven's own hall unless a harder man has pushed him there. He stood on the flags twisting his hat, and his apologetic face had gone gray and sleepless, and he would not look at her. "The mortgagee," he began, "has instructed me, regarding the arrears on Greywater, and regarding the nature of your present situation." He swallowed. "You are to cease your inquiries into the affairs of the old drainage company, which are closed, and long settled, and no business of A. Merrick. And you are to quit Greywater by the new year. If you do not, foreclosure will be immediate and total, and the contents of the house sold to the last spoon. Those are the terms. I am only the messenger." "You are the messenger," Aveline agreed. She had risen from the table. She was aware of Fenn gone still in the doorway, and of the Duke, who had not risen, watching from his chair with the terrible stillness of a hawk on a post. "Then carry a message back, Mr. Tolliver. Tell the gentleman who holds my roof that I am employed at Ravenmoor as man of business to his Grace the Duke, at a wage that I am putting the accounts of this estate in order, and that among those accounts are the old drainage companies which are not closed and not settled, whatever he has told you to say. Tell him I have found where the money went. And tell him that I have never in my life met a lock I could not read my way into, and that if he wished those particular books left shut, he ought to have thought of it before he told A. Merrick there was money missing." The little man had gone the color of tallow. "Miss Merrick." His voice dropped, and it shook. "I beg you. You do not know. The man who holds that paper is not. He is not a man you refuse. There are people who crossed him who lost everything they had and never learned the reason. Please, sign the paper. For your own sake, sign it, and go somewhere he cannot see you." The room went very cold, and it had nothing to do with the season. "Fenn," said the Duke, rising at last, and his voice was quiet and pleasant, and made the hairs stand on Aveline's arms. "Mr. Tolliver is unwell. See him to his gig, and see that he understands he is not to set foot on Ravenmoor land again. If he has business with anyone under my protection, he may bring it to my solicitors, in writing, and I will decide whether it is worth the ink." He looked at the agent. "You may tell your master that as well." When the gig had rattled away into the early dark, Aveline stood at the window with her arms wrapped around herself, and did not turn when the Duke came to stand beside her. "You know who holds it," she said. "The paper on Greywater. You have known for some days. I have watched you not tell me. I have suspected." He was quiet. "It is held through nominees, through 3 cutouts and a company in the city, the way a careful man holds a thing he does not wish his name attached to. But the company has a name behind it, and the name behind it, Miss Merrick, is a financier and a magistrate who sits on the bench in the county town and endows almshouses, and is spoken of, this very winter, as the coming man of the whole North. He is floating a great new venture, a canal, a reclamation, the draining of 10,000 acres, and every man of means from here to the city is begging to put money in it." He turned to look at her. "His name is Silas Corvin." Evelyn did not move. Somewhere very far down inside her, a child of 7 closed her small hand around a sugared almond and heard a smiling man tell her father. She had the makings of a clerk. "He kept our father's books, and it would appear that he has spent the 20 years since building himself a kingdom on the money he took, and buying up every scrap of paper that might one day let the last Merrick in England read her way back into it." The Duke's scarred face was grim in the last gray light. "He does not want Greywater, Aveline. He never did. He wants you gone from the one desk in the country where the 2 halves of his lie can meet." And until this afternoon, he did not know they already had. The cold that came down on the valley in the 3rd week of December was of a different order than any Aveline had known. It came out of the northeast in the night, a still and murderous cold with no wind in it at all, and by morning the ink had frozen in the well on the library table, and the great marsh below the house had set as hard as a paved road, and the birds fell dead out of the white sky. Barrow sent word that 2 of his ewes had frozen where they stood. The Alderton road closed. And Aveline, who had ridden over in the last of the passable weather and could not now ride back, found herself for the first time a guest under the Raven's roof after dark, in a chill blue guest chamber that Fenn had opened with an air of grave disapproval and a great many warming pans. She learned what the cold did to the Duke on the 2nd night of it. She had stayed late in the library, unwilling to leave the one warm room working by candle at the drainage accounts, when she became aware that the scratch of his pen had stopped. She looked up. He was sitting very still, upright, both hands flat on the table, and his face in the candlelight had gone the color of the frost on the window. He was breathing in a careful, shallow, deliberate way, as though each breath were a step taken across ice that might give. "Your Grace, it is nothing." The words came out thin. "It passes. Go up to bed." She had spent too many years watching a proud man ration his suffering to be fooled by another one. She came around the table. Close to, she could hear it. The faint catch and whistle deep in his chest. The sound of a bellows with a tear in it. "The war," she said. It was not a question. A wall came down. His jaw was tight. At a siege whose name I have taught myself to forget. It took 3 ribs and a piece of the lung beneath them, and the surgeon said I would not see Christmas, and I have made a point of seeing 11 of them since out of pure spite. Tupai, a ghost of the dry humor, and then it guttered as the next breath caught. In the deep cold, it seizes the old break. It feels as though the wall is coming down again slowly, 1 stone at a time. And you sit in a freezing library at midnight to prove it cannot touch you. Aveline was already moving. "You are as great a fool as I am. Stay where you are and do not, on any account, be brave at me." She did not ring for Fenn. What she did herself, quickly and without ceremony, the way she had once done for a father whose gout had made a torment of a bedsheet. She built the fire up until it roared. She dragged the heavy settle from the wall to the very edge of the hearth, and made him move to it, so that his back was to the blaze and the heat could reach the old wound from behind. She went herself to the cold kitchen, past a scandalized scullery maid, and set water to boil, and brought it up in a great basin, and set it steaming on a stool before him, so the warm, wet air would do for his ruined chest what dry cold could not. "Lean over it," she said. "Breathe the steam slowly. Do not fight it." He looked at her over the basin, and for once there was no armor in it at all, only a plain and exhausted astonishment. "You have done this before." "I have done every hard thing before, Your Grace. It is the only kind of thing I have ever been given to do." She reached out, and with steady fingers she loosened the cravat at his throat and drew it away, and did not flinch from the whole ruin of the scar as it came clear in the firelight, the pale rope of it running down into the collar of his shirt. She had seen worse. She had nursed worse. She let him see that she had there. "Now the cold cannot use your own collar against you. Breathe." He breathed. The steam curled up around his hard, tired face. And slowly, over a quarter of an hour in which neither of them spoke, the terrible, careful shallowness of it eased, and the catch went out of it, and the color came back into his lips, and the wall, stone by stone, was persuaded to stand. She stayed kneeling by the settle, the whole of it, one hand flat between his shoulder blades, so she would feel the moment the breathing turned, the way she would have kept a hand on a fevered child. She offered him no pity. Pity, she had learned in a cold house, was a kind of theft. It took a person's dignity and gave back only the pleasure the pitier felt in being kind. She gave him none of it. She gave him only her steady hand and her plain voice, and the fact of her staying. And she understood, kneeling there, that these were the only true gifts she had ever had to give, and that no one, in all her life, had ever wanted them until now. "Out there," she said, when his breathing had gone quiet and even. "I am a fallen woman, a Merrick, and worse than a Merrick." A word said too loudly at a crossroads. She kept her eyes on the fire. "In this house I have set a duke's accounts to rights, and read a thief out of 20 years of hiding, and kept the breath in a dying man on a cold night. I know which of those two women is real, Your Grace. I have known for some weeks now. I only wonder that you seem to know it too." His ruined right hand came up. It moved slowly, as though it had a long way to travel, and it came to rest, warm and heavy and shaking very slightly, over her hand where it lay upon his knee. "Cassian," he said. She turned her head and looked at him. "My name," he said. "You have kept me breathing. I think that has earned you the use of my name, when there is no one by to hear you scandalize us both with it." "Cassian," she said, and felt the whole cold architecture of 10 guarded years shift a fraction on its foundations, and did not pull her hand away. They stayed like that a long while, the fire settling, the great house creaking in the frost around them, the old dog sighing in his sleep. And it was Aveline, in the end, whose eye fell on the thing that broke the spell, because she could no more stop reading than she could stop breathing, and there upon the settle beside him, spilled from the packet of his father's papers he had been reading when the cold took him, lay a single folded letter she had not seen before, its seal broken. The direction on it in a hand she now knew better than her own, Silas Corvin's hand. And beneath the fold, in the old Duke's failing scrawl, 3 underlined words that stopped her heart. He knew about James. "Who is James?" Aveline said. Cassian took the letter from her hand. In the firelight, the last of the ease went out of his face. "I did not know. It is the one thread in all my father's papers I could never follow, because there was no one left to ask. He wrote that name a dozen times in his last months, always alone, always underlined, and never once beside a surname. He turned the folded sheet over. This came with the packet from the locked drawer. I had not yet reached it. The cold took me first. They read it together, heads bent over the single candle, and the reading of it turned the warm room cold again. It was a letter in Silas Corvin's hand, 20 years old, addressed to the old Duke in the smooth and reassuring phrases of a trusted man. The drainage accounts, Corvin wrote, were in perfect order. His Grace need not trouble himself with the tedium of the figures. The surveyor, a fellow named Ford, had been paid off and sent north, and would trouble the company no further with his complaints about the works, which were the ordinary grumbling of a man who wished to be paid twice for the same labor. And across the foot of it, in the old Duke's failing hand, pressed so hard the pen had torn the paper, were the 3 words, and now 2 more beneath them. He knew about James Ford as James. Ford, Aveline breathed. The surveyor. She was already turning to the ledgers, her hands moving of their own accord, the machinery in her head throwing over faster than she could speak it. Cassian, the 3,000 pounds, the main drain that was billed and never cut. Who would know, past any doubt, whether a drain had been dug across 10,000 acres of marsh? Not a duke, not a baron, not a magistrate on a bench. One man, the man who surveyed the ground and set the stakes and would have walked every yard of it. The engineer. James Ford knew there was no drain, because James Ford was paid to survey the cutting of it and watched it never happen. He was the one living proof that the money was stolen and not spent. She pressed her hands flat to the table to stop them shaking. Your father found that out. At the very end, sick and alone and disbelieved by the whole county, he worked out that the one man who could break the whole lie open was a surveyor named Ford, and he went, looking for him. And Corvin. The candle guttered. Neither of them reached to trim it. What happened to Ford? Aveline said, though the cold thing uncoiling in her chest already knew. Cassian's voice was very quiet. There was a drowning. The winter my father died. I remember it only because Fenn spoke of it as an ill omen. 2 deaths in the valley in a single hard month. A stranger, they said, a northern man, no one anyone knew, found in the spring melt down where the old cut runs into the marsh. He looked at her. In the very ground he had once surveyed. They called it a misadventure, a man who did not know the country, walking on ice that would not hold. He did not drown by misadventure, Aveline said. He knew that ground better than any soul alive. It is the one place on earth he would never have set a careless foot. She heard how steady her own voice was, and marveled at it, because inside she had gone to ash. Corvin learned your father had found him, and James Ford went into the marsh, and your father's proof went with him. And 3 weeks later, your father was dead of a broken heart that the whole county mistook for old age. And the last thing he ever managed was to hide this letter in a locked drawer and pray that one day someone would come who could read it. The fire cracked. Somewhere in the frozen dark outside, the house settled on its bones. She looked at the man beside her, at the scar in the ruined hand, and the gray eyes that had watched a father eaten alive by a truth he could not prove, and she understood, all at once and completely, the true shape of the thing she had spent her whole life pointing the wrong way. I hated you, she said softly. I hated your name before I could spell my own. My father died in an upstairs room, cursing the Ravenmoors, and I carried that curse for him for 10 years, like a lamp I was afraid to set down. Her eyes filled, and, for once, she let them, because there are some truths a proud woman must pay for in the only coin that counts. And your family was never the knife, Cassian. It was only the other hand it was held against. We spent 20 years hating each other across a marsh, and the whole time the man who cut us both was standing between us, smiling, handing the children sugared almonds and keeping the books. Cassian reached out and with his ruined hand wiped the tear from her cheek before it fell, as gently as if she were made of something that could break. "Then let us stop hating the wrong man," he said, "and go and ruin the right one." And there was more she saw, the last piece sliding home. Corvin had left her to rot in a dead house for 20 years, untouched, because a starving woman with no name and no money could prove nothing. It was the great new venture that had changed everything. The Fen Navigation. 10,000 acres, every man of means in the north, clamoring to buy in. The whole glittering edifice, raised upon the same drowned marsh and the same water rights she had refused to sign away to a sweating agent in the autumn. If the old fraud surfaced now at the very hour he reached for his crown, it would not merely embarrass him. It would burn the new company to the waterline and take his kingdom down with it. Corvin was not tidying a loose end. He had wagered everything one last time, and only just learned that the single witness he could neither buy nor drown had been sitting at the Raven's table all along, quietly reading. But even as he said it, they heard it, faint through the frozen glass, from far down the buried drive, the crunch of wheels on hard snow, a carriage, moving slowly through a valley where every road had been shut for 3 days, come to a house that received no callers. A moment later, Fen's tread came quick along the passage, quicker than Aveline had ever heard it, and the old butler appeared in the library door with his shut-drawer face wide open at last. "Your Grace," he said. "Why?" "There is a gentleman come up the drive-through weather that has stopped the mail. He gives his card as a magistrate of the county, and he asks, most cordially, whether Miss Merrick is at home." Fen swallowed. "The card reads Silas Corvin." Silas Corvin came into the library the way a man comes into a room he already believes he owns. And he was near 60 now, comfortable and unhurried, with a kind, well-fed face and silver hair brushed back from a wide brow, dressed in the sober, expensive black of a man who wished the world to know he had money and did not need to shout it. He carried his hat and gloves in one hand and warmth in the other, and he beamed at Aveline across the length of the room, as though the sight of her had made his whole cold journey worthwhile. "Little Miss Merrick," he said, and his voice was exactly as she remembered it, low and warm and sweet as the almonds, but not so little now. "You have your mother's eyes and your father's head for a column of figures, they tell me. What a thing! What a very great pity, all of it. May I sit? The roads have been most unkind to an old man's bones." He sat without waiting to be asked. Bracken, by the fire, lifted his gray head, looked at the visitor a long moment, and then rose and crossed the room to stand stiffly against Aveline's legs, and did not lie down again. Even the dog, she thought. "Your Grace," Corvin inclined his head to Cassian with a deference so perfect it curdled into insult. "I will not waste your evening. I am a plain man of business, and you are a busy one, and Miss Merrick has clearly been filling your library with a great deal of very old paper. Let me be direct. It grieves me to see it. I knew her father. I held that dear, foolish, unlucky man in real affection, and I have watched his daughter reduced to keeping tradesmen's sums in the backs of shops, and it has weighed on me. So I have come through weather that nearly killed my horses to make things right." "Have you?" said Cassian. He had not moved from his chair. "I have." Corvin folded his soft hands. "Miss Merrick, the arrears on Greywater are forgiven. The whole of them tonight, with my own pen. Further, I will settle upon you an annuity of £200 a year for your life, that you may live as a gentlewoman ought and never keep another man's ledger as long as you draw breath. In exchange, I ask only two small things. That you give over to me your late father's business papers, which are, I fear, riddled with his errors, and an embarrassment to his memory, best consigned to my discretion. And that you set aside this unhealthy digging in a grave that is 20 years cold. He smiled, and the smile did not reach his eyes at all. Let the dead lie, my dear. It is what they are for, and if I do not, Evelyn said. The warmth in the room changed temperature without changing its face. Then I should be very much afraid for you, Corvin said gently. You are an unmarried woman living openly in the house of an unmarried duke, and the county has already found the word for that. You hold, by your own boast to my agent, a great quantity of ledgers that are not your property, but the property of the old company, which is to say, my property, and there is an ugly name in law for holding what is not yours. I sit upon the bench, Miss Merrick. I have committed men to jail for a stolen fowl, and his grace. He turned the kind face upon Cassian. His grace came home from the wars to an estate mortgaged past its rents, and has been borrowing against a great and ancient name ever since, to keep the roofs on. A word from me in the city. Your grace, one quiet word about where you have chosen to place your confidence and your affections, and every note you have signed comes due in a fortnight. I would be sorry to see the Raven pulled down over the reading of some mildewed columns by a clever girl with a grievance. He let it sit. The fire ticked. Somewhere, the frost cracked a branch like a shot. I am, you understand, a reasonable man, Corvin said, rising, drawing on his gloves finger by finger. I do not threaten. I merely count as Miss Merrick does, and I can see the whole of the column which she, poor child, cannot. I will send my clerk, on the second morning of the new year, for the papers and your signature. That is a fortnight. Use it wisely. Warm yourselves. Consider what a name is worth, and a roof, and a neck. He bowed to Aveline, precisely as one bows to a child at an audit dinner. It was a very great pleasure, little miss. Your father would be proud of the head, if not of the company it keeps. He walked to the door entirely satisfied, a man who had never in 20 years laid a card he could not win upon, and it was only there, with his gloved hand on the latch, that something made him pause. It was the silence at his back. He had expected fear from the woman, and fury from the ruined soldier, and he had got neither. He had got a duke sitting quite still in a chair with the ghost of something almost like patience on his scarred face, and a woman with her hand in the fur of a great gray dog, watching him go with dry and thoughtful eyes. For the first time in a very long time, Silas Corvin felt the faint cold touch of a column that would not add. A fortnight, he said again, less warmly, and went out into the snow. The library was very quiet after the great door had closed on him. Aveline made her hand let go of Bracken's fur. He can do all of it, she said. The charge, your notes, the word in the city. He was not bluffing. A magistrate's word against a fallen woman's arithmetic is no contest, and he knows it. He can do all of it, Cassian agreed. He rose and crossed to the window and watched the carriage lanterns swing away down the buried drive. If the board were, as he believes it to be. Something in his voice turned her head. Cassian, what have you done? He did not look from the glass. A great deal of correspondence these past weeks, in a very poor left hand. You thought I was answering my letters, Aveline. I was writing them. A cold, bright edge came into his voice. He has given us a fortnight. He should never have given us anything at all. Silas Corvin returned to Ravenmore on the second morning of the new year, in bright, hard sunlight, with a clerk and a strong box, and the settled good humor of a man come to collect a debt he has never once doubted. The thaw had not come. The marsh still lay locked and white below the house, but the sun was out and had lit the cold library as Fenn showed the visitor in. Corvin took in the long table, the two of them waiting at it, the papers stacked square at Aveline's elbow, and he smiled his warm and dreadful smile. "I am glad to find you both sensible," he said. "A season for new beginnings. Miss Merrick, the deed of surrender, if you please, and your father's papers into my clerk's box, and we need never trouble one another again. I have brought the annuity in writing, 200 a year. You will bless me for it in time, but—" "Sit down, Mr. Corvin," said Aveline. Something in her voice, the plain, flat voice she kept for numbers, made the smile hesitate. He sat. "You came here a fortnight ago and laid a column in front of me and told me I could not see the whole of it. You were mistaken. I have spent every hour of your fortnight seeing the whole of it. Would you care to hear the sum?" She did not wait for him to answer. She opened the first ledger. £3,000 for a main drain that was never cut. 1,200 in wages to gangs that never lifted a spade, spread across 4 seasons, so no single year would show the wound. Every figure small enough to swallow and clever enough to hide, sent out of one house and kept from the other, year upon year, until both families had beggared themselves and buried a friendship and gone to their graves, each blaming the other. She turned a page and another, and each one fell like a stone. The whole came to £19,000, Mr. Corvin. That is what you took. That is the kingdom. I have it entered and cross-entered and reconciled against both sets of books in a fair hand any clerk in England can follow, copied 3 times over, and no longer in this house. Corvin's soft hands had gone still upon his knees. A woman's arithmetic, he said, but the warmth had thinned. A grievance in ink. No court would hang a magistrate on the say-so of a fallen girl who cannot keep her own roof. No, Cassian agreed, from his end of the table. Which is why we did not stop at her arithmetic. He set a slim, weather-stained book on the table and slid it the length of the wood, until it stopped before Corvin. A surveyor's field book, its cover marbled with old damp. Even from where she sat, Aveline saw the visitor's face change as he read the name stamped on it. "James Ford was a careful man," Cassian said quietly. "When my father found him, Ford did not merely tell his tale. He wrote it and swore it before a magistrate in the north who was not in your pocket, and lodged a fair copy of his survey with a solicitor in the city against the day he might meet with an accident. He was a surveyor, Corvin. He knew better than any man alive that if he drowned in that marsh, it would be because someone put him there. So he made certain his drowning would speak." Cassian's gray eyes did not blink. "It has taken my father's death and a clever girl with a grievance to make it speak at last, but it speaks. In his own hand before witnesses, there is no main drain. There never was. And the man who signed the order that paid for it was you." The sunlight lay very bright and very cold across the table. Corvin did not move. "The proof is with the king's bench," Cassian went on, "and with 3 firms of solicitors, and a summary of it sits this morning on the desk of a gentleman of the press who has long wondered how a steward's son came to float the greatest company in the north. You cannot drown a document. You cannot jail a fortnight's worth of copies for a stolen fowl. There is nothing left for you to buy, because the only thing for sale now is your reputation, and the market has closed." Corvin rose. His face had gone the gray of the frost. "You have no idea what you have set your hand to. I hold paper on half this county. I will call it in. I will have you both in the gutter by Lady Day, and your precious documents will burn with everything else."
"Ah,"
said Cassian, and for the first time all winter he smiled, and it was a terrible thing to see. "Your paper. About that." He drew a folded sheet from his coat, the way he had once drawn his father's letter in a cold parlor, and laid it gently down. "You wagered everything on the Fen navigation. 10,000 acres, and every guinea you could beg or borrow poured into the floating of it, and a mountain of short notes, signed to carry you until the shares sold. I have spent these weeks, in a very poor left hand, buying those notes. Quietly through cutouts and a company with no name upon it, in the manner of a careful man who does not wish to be seen. I hold them all now. I could call them in this afternoon." He tilted his head. "And your great company cannot lay a yard of pipe across that marsh without the water rights of the old grey water cut, which Miss Merrick declined to sell your agent in October for the price of a theft dressed up for church. The company is dead, Corvin. It died the morning she refused it, and only you did not know." For a long moment the great room held no sound but the tick of the frost. Silas Corvin looked at the field book and the ledgers and the folded sheet, and last of all at the pale woman with her hand quiet on the great grey dog who had once taken a sugared almond from him and had grown up against every arrangement he had made into the one column he could not force to add. And whatever he had come in holding went out of him all at once the way water goes out of a broken cut, and left an old man standing in a borrowed grandeur that no longer belonged to him. "There is a constable at the gate," Cassian said, "who has business with you regarding the death of a surveyor found drowned in the marsh. I would not keep him waiting in the cold. It is a hard season for old bones." Corvin went out without a word. They heard a small commotion in the drive, and then nothing. Aveline sat very still at the table where the whole of it lay proven and finished. The lamp she had carried for her father for 10 years, the lamp she had been afraid to set down, had gone out at last, and she found she did not know what her hands were for without it. "So," she said, and was startled by how thin her voice had become, "it is done. Your father is cleared. Mine is cleared. The debt you spoke of is settled to the last farthing." She began, carefully, to square the papers into their stack, because it was something for her hands to do. "You have what you rode to Greywater for, your grace. I will take my father's ledgers home in the morning, as we agreed, and you need not send the cart. Barrow will come for me. The account between us is closed." She did not look up as she said it. She could not. Because the thing she had not let herself count all these weeks, the one figure she had kept out of every column, was that a bargain, once fulfilled, is over. And she had been the last ledger in the house to balance, and now the books were shut. For a long moment Cassian said nothing, and she squared her papers, and the winter sun moved across the table, and she believed that would be the whole of it. That she would gather her ledgers and her dignity, and go back to the cold house, and be once more only what was left. Then he rose. The uneven tread came around the table, and the ruined hand came to rest flat upon the stack of papers she was straightening, so that she could not lift them, and she had no choice but to look up. "The account between us," Cassian said, "is the single worst piece of arithmetic I have ever heard you do. It is plain enough. You wanted your father cleared. He is cleared. You do not require a man of business now. There is no crime left to find." "No, I do not require a man of business." He did not move his hand. "I rode to Greywater in October to settle a dead man's debt, Aveline. You were a means to an end, and the end was my father's peace. And I told myself that was the whole of it because it was safer than the truth. The dry armor had gone out of his voice entirely. "Somewhere between the fire, I built in your cold parlor, and this morning the debt stopped being the reason. I began, heaven help me, to count the days until you came up the drive in that ridiculous cart, because this great cold house has exactly one warm room in it, and it is warm because it is the room you are in. You cannot," she managed. "I am a fallen woman. A byword. You are a duke. The world has already decided what I am. The world spent 20 years deciding your father was a gambler and mine a thief, and it was wrong about both, and I have stopped taking its opinion on anything at all." He came down then with the stiff care of the wounded, not upon one knee, for the leg would not allow it, and neither of them wanted the theater of it, but low enough to bring his scarred face level with hers, and took her ink-stained hand in his ruined one, as though it were the last warm thing in a hard winter. "So let the world choke on it. I am asking you to marry me, not to save you. You have never once needed saving, and I would not insult you by offering it. I am asking because you are the only soul alive who ever looked at the Raven and saw a man worth a second glance, and stayed to take a third. Society respects a title. It will whisper about a duke's clever mistress until it is hoarse, but it cannot ignore a duchess. It will have to bow to the last of the Merricks in the street, and your father's name will go back into every drawing-room from Alderton to the sea, not as ruin, but as the name your husband was proud to take beside his own. That is the pragmatic argument," she said, and her voice shook, and she did not care. "It is." His thumb moved once across her knuckles. "The other is only that I love you, and that I have never said that sentence to a living soul, and would like to be permitted to say it a great many more times before the leg, or the lung, or the bad temper finishes me. Stay, Aveline. Not as my clerk. As the other half of the table." She looked at him, at the gray eyes gone bare and unsure, at the man who had knelt at her hearth and would not let her be cold, and the last wall she had, the oldest and highest built, the day they lowered her father into the ground, came quietly down. "You are a great fool," she said, "and your accounts are a disgrace, and I shall have to audit you for the rest of your natural life. I am counting on it." "Yes," said Aveline Merrick, and it came out half a laugh and half a sob, and entirely unlike any sound she had made in 10 years. "Yes, you impossible man, yes." He kissed her then, in the cold bright library, with the ledgers open and the old dog thumping his tail against the hearthstone, and it was nothing like the courtesies of a drawing-room. It was the kiss of two people left out too long in the cold, who had given up on ever coming in, and it tasted of ink and winter and the fierce relief of a column that added at last. The thaw came late that year, but it came. It came in a green rush in the middle of March, the frost breaking off the moor in a week, the reeds along the old cut going soft again, the marsh running bright with meltwater. They were married in the small grey church at the edge of the Greywater land, with Barrow and his sons in their Sunday coats, Fenn weeping with great dignity into a handkerchief the size of a tablecloth, and Bracken asleep in the aisle in a patch of sun. Aveline did not wear white. She wore a deep green, the color of the reeds coming back to life, and carried nothing, because her hands, for the first time in her life, had nothing they were required to hold. Silas Corvin did not see that spring from anywhere pleasant. The Fen navigation collapsed within the month, and the fraud, once the gentlemen of the press had it, filled the papers for a glorious fortnight. There was a trial, and there would in time be a graver one, concerning a surveyor and a marsh and a drowning that was no accident. The pillar of the county became a tale told over port, and the almshouses he had endowed took his name off the gate. And in the spring after that, on the low ground between Greywater and Ravenmoor, the digging began at last. They drained the marsh honestly this time, every yard surveyed, and paid for and cut in the open, the dream that had ruined 2 families and made a monster of a 3rd man finally kept, because the 2 who kept it had learned exactly what it cost to lie about a ditch. Aveline kept the accounts, and not one entry in them could not bear the light. She was at the great table one afternoon the next autumn when Cassian came in from the new works, mud to the knee, the color the war had stolen come back into his face. Bracken lifted his gray head, sighed, and put it down again. "You are auditing me," he said, coming to stand behind her chair. "Someone must. You have paid the drainage gangs a full shilling a day above the county rate. You are the most extravagant man in the north. They are cutting a ditch. My father and yours died quarreling over. They may have the shilling." He set his ruined hand on her shoulder, and she covered it with her ink-stained one, without looking up. "Come and see the water. Go where we sent it. The numbers will keep. The numbers always keep. It is people who do not. Then let the numbers wait, your grace, and keep me instead." She set the pen down. She thought, as she rose, of a morning 2 winters gone, a hired agent on a frozen step, 4 rooms shut against the cold, and a girl who had refused to sign and refused to leave, and had no earthly reason to hope, and had gone on refusing anyway. It had been the cruelest winter of her life, the one that brought the Raven up her drive with an offer no soul could have imagined. She had, she decided, taking her husband's arm and walking out into the light to watch a drowned country come dry, grown rather fond of how it had turned out. Did Aveline and Cassian's long, cold road to justice leave you cheering for them? There is nothing quite so satisfying as watching a quiet, clever underdog turn the very weapon meant to destroy her against the man who built it, especially with a wounded, fiercely loyal duke at her side. If this grounded, slow-burn historical romance warmed you on a cold night, please tap the like button to help the channel grow. Share it with anyone who loves a brilliant heroine and a good man worth saving, and subscribe and ring the bell so the next story finds you. Tell me your favorite moment in the comments below.